Learn 2, creating new materials with AI. After completing this module, you will be able to generate new texts that incorporate target language features within a chosen context. In other words, you will be able to make new materials for your students that focus on something that you want them to learn. And you'll be able to put all of that inside of a story or some kind of a context that is interesting to you and to the students. Now, what we're talking about here is using artificial intelligence for materials development. And we can think of it as being a very light approach or a very heavy approach to using artificial intelligence. On the lighter side, we might think of using it to get feedback on materials or proofread, or perhaps to generate a sample response to our materials that we have already created. And if we use artificial intelligence a little more heavily, we might use it to generate supplements to help students understand and learn, or we might even use it to create new materials. And that's what this video is about. But let's go a little bit deeper on these 4 different examples of ways we can use AI with creating materials. On the lighter side, getting AI feedback on the materials that we already have, we can use it for proofreading, for checking grammar and spelling and word choices. We can use it for examples. We can ask for more examples to improve our lessons or our worksheets to make it easier for students. We can ask for counter arguments. We can say to the chatbot, what are some counter arguments to the information I provide in my lesson? We can ask for clarification. Maybe our instructions can be improved, and artificial intelligence can find ways to improve that. Now, on the next slightly heavier use of AI, we can generate assignment responses. So maybe we've got instructions for something we want the students to do, and we ask it to make something. So we provide our assignment instructions to AI. We ask it to generate a sample response. This can help in many different ways. It can help us to check our instructions to see if they're clear or not, and to see how they might be interpreted. It can allow us to generate examples of what a completed assignment might look like. And that can be very useful for our students. We can give a good example of what it might look like and a bad example of something that would not be acceptable. Now, these examples may be based on something slightly different from our original instructions, so that it's not something that students can directly copy and just change a couple words. We can very easily ask the AI to make an example, but on a slightly different topic, perhaps, for example. These examples can help students understand, and this has been shown through research to improve students' success when they can see examples of what they are supposed to do. We can also ask AI to generate assignment rubrics. Perhaps we have already created our assignment and our instructions, but AI can help us generate a rubric for grading the assignment. Now, if we do that, we should share the rubric with students to make the grading more transparent, to make it easier for the students to succeed in our classes. But this, in another video, we talked about generating supplementary material. We talked about things like pre-reading or previewing questions that we can give to students before they watch, say, maybe a video, or perhaps they read a newspaper article, something like that. They can also get a glossary with the vocabulary and the parts of speech and definitions, even example sentences. We can ask for translations of some words into Vietnamese. We can ask for an outline of a video or a reading to help students get a sense of what they are going to be looking at. We could do a variation on that outline where there are gaps and students need to use it to take notes, and they find the answers to fill in the gaps from looking at the text or watching the video. We can also, of course, generate quizzes to allow students to check their own knowledge, or for teachers to see how they're doing. Now, this video is about creating completely new materials, but it's not so different from what we talked about with creating supplementary materials. We're still talking about creating materials that help students learn English. Now, what do you think? What are some advantages of creating completely new materials for your classes? If you think about it for a moment, I'm sure you could think of a few things. One thing that I like is this quote from a book called Teaching with AI by Bowen and Watson. They say that motivation is triggered by relevance. Examples that are tailored to student interests are more likely to seem worthwhile. Would you like to practice this concept with food, space, or sports applications? You might ask an AI to revise an existing assessment by finding more current or topical examples. AI can quickly create alternative problem sets for chemistry versus engineering majors, music versus fashion lovers, or majors versus non-majors. Your task is crafting and refining the prompt. So some advantages of creating new materials in addition to that, We can match material to students' interests, as you saw. We can adjust the levels of the materials to different students' needs and abilities. We can focus on language objectives that students need extra help with. And we can incorporate previously learned content as review. But there's one more thing. We can make class interesting. Some steps to designing this new content with AI is first, we want to identify our objective, right? What are we trying to accomplish? What language do we want them to learn? What skill are we trying to help them develop? Then we try to determine what causes students to struggle with this skill or this feature of language. And we select a strategy for helping the students address this struggle. Or perhaps we just want them to get some more practice or to have an interesting place to look at it and learn about it. We decide the best format, a worksheet, a quiz, whatever you want. And then we choose a context that matches the students' interests. Now, we can think about this for a moment. What do you think? What are your students interested in? What do they like to learn about? And what are their favorite class activities? When you think about these things, you're thinking along the lines of, what kind of materials could I create to make my students more excited about class? Some possibilities. Maybe you can make some materials that are related to popular movies, or to your town, or to sports teams or athletes, or perhaps to current or upcoming events in your school and your community. For example, maybe a holiday is coming, or a school festival, or something else. And that's where your imagination comes in. Now, as we create the text, we can adjust the text to match our students' levels. When we think about the different levels that we want to target, we have to communicate this to artificial intelligence some way as we are creating the materials. So we might ask for something that's matched to a particular reading level, beginner, intermediate, advanced, something like that. Or we could be more specific. We could talk about CEFR levels, the Common European Frame of Reference, which has levels A1 and A2 for beginners, and then it goes up to B1 and then B2 until the advanced C1, and the top one is C2. We could also talk about Lexile measures, and they go on a scale from 200 lexiles for beginning readers to 1600 for advanced readers, based on text complexity and reader ability. Or we could think about the vocabulary. We can ask the AI to use vocabulary that's academic, or perhaps use vocabulary that was found in the units, things like that. We can be very specific about the kinds of vocabulary we want to see in the materials that we are creating together with artificial intelligence. So here's an example. I really like to create new texts with artificial intelligence that will help my students discover language in context. I think this is a fun way to introduce new language and bring in something that's topical for the class. So my example is a language discovery passage, okay? And so with artificial intelligence assistance, we can create short passages on topics of interest to our students. And within the passage, we can embed language that we want our students to learn. As students read and enjoy the passage, they can discover aspects of the language for themselves, and teachers can then reinforce what the students notice. This is a way to make learning memorable for the students. So here's a scenario in my example. Let's imagine that we have a class here in Vietnam, and the class is learning about simple past. And in a prior class, they learned about regular verbs, which use ed in the past. Today, the teacher wants them to discover irregular past verbs. And so the other thing that we know about the class is they love the Golden Star Warriors. So I can go to Claude, or I can go to anything, like ChatGPT or Gemini. In my example, I'm going to go to Claude, and I've got this prompt for them. I say, you are an expert in EFL instructor in Vietnam. Let's make an example paragraph for high beginner high school EFL students. And I've given the level here, CEFR level A2 or low B1. The paragraph uses common irregular verbs in the past. See, I've said what kind of language I want to see in this example paragraph. And now I say the paragraph is about a visit by the Golden Star Warriors, Vietnam's national football team, to Mr. Yui's English as a Foreign Language class. And so from that, if I give that I get a paragraph very quickly generated for me. Now, what do I do with this paragraph? Well, I share it with the students, but I share it in a particular procedure to help them learn and enjoy. So here's what happens. I show them the passage, and I say, go ahead, everybody, take a look and read the story. and I let them read it, and they see that it's about the Golden Star Warriors came to Mr. Yui's English class. The students sat quietly when the players went into the classroom. So if the students are fans of the team, then this could be a kind of exciting fantasy for them to imagine the team visiting school, visiting the students, and interacting with the students. And so if you look at the passage, you'll see that it's about the context that I asked for. You may also notice that it is at a beginner level for readers. It's not so complicated. And if you look even more closely, you'll see that it has the grammar. And so this is what happens next. So after the students have read the story and maybe we discuss the story a little bit, maybe talk about vocabulary a little bit, then I ask them to pay attention to the grammar. And I might begin by saying something like, how many verbs do you see? And so students take a moment to count them. And then I ask them, more specifically, well, what are they? And the students will tell me one by one what the verbs are. And as they do that, at the front of the room, I can underline those so that everyone can see all the verbs. And now we're really paying attention to the verbs. We're noticing the verbs in this passage that I generated with artificial intelligence. And then the next question is, what is special about these verbs? Now remember, in my example here, in our last class, we talked about verbs that end with ed, right? Like we visited the teacher, we walked to his house, something like that, right? But now these verbs here, these are you sure, everybody? Are you sure these are these verbs in the past, or when are they? And students will be fairly confident that these verbs are in the past. And if I ask them why, they'll point out that the first two words are last week. So, okay, so this story must be about the past, but I don't see any EDs on these verbs. So can you tell me what's going on here? And so students naturally come to notice that some verbs do not use ED, but they still communicate the past. These verbs are not, they don't look like the typical present verbs that we are accustomed to, perhaps. So we're noticing things about the language here. And so just to break this down again, the procedure that I did is first I shared the passage with the students. We discussed the story and I helped them to understand it. And then I call attention to the grammar and help students to notice it. I invite students to explain what they see. Well, why do we see this? How do you know this is past? And then we use the story as the beginning of a lesson based on what the students already understand and what they need to learn. So through this whole process of working with the students and having them look at this passage together with me, I start to see what do they need and what do they already know, and how can I build on that for the rest of my lesson? So here's my challenge for you. Can you do this? Can you choose an important grammar point or some important vocabulary from one of your classes and then decide what kind of text would provide a good context for learning that content? Consider choosing a very personalized context. Next, you can use AI to generate a text that includes the language and the content you want. After that, you examine the text together, you as a teacher, before you give it to the class, you examine the text and you ask AI for refinements as necessary, or you make them yourself. All right, so after completing this module, I hope you are now able to generate new texts that incorporate target language features within a chosen context. And this has been Learn To, creating new materials with AI.